And we're live.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the free Assange online Vigil series number 10.0, hosted by Andrew Smith, Christy Doff, Steve Poikonen, and me, Taylor Hudak, in honor of 9/11. Tonight, we will be discussing the 9/11 whistleblowers, and we are joined by a very special guest, Jason Bermas. Jason is an independent documentary filmmaker and content creator.
And there she goes. And since we're live, why don't I just take it from here, fellas? So I am an independent documentary filmmaker and content creator, and I have done two separate films on 9/11, Loose Change Final Cut, and I'm the writer and director of Fabled Enemies. Both of them take very different looks at those events, but at the end, they're asking some very tough questions that I still think need to be answered today.
So, could you go into exactly what you think those questions are and kind of what you've seen change about the world since everything that you've done and the work that you've put in?
Well, brother, let's look at it this way. First of all, the reason that 9/11 is so important even today, it is because our entire foreign and domestic policy is based on what? The official narrative that the mainstream media, military industrial complex puppets sold us. Let's be honest about that. In fact, even today, when they're trying to push into an Iranian conflict, they are pointing to the AUMF, which is the authorization of military force that was passed a week after 9/11, where they targeted any terrorist group, Al Qaeda, and them able to declare war on that group since they were responsible for 9/11. We're at 18 years, and it was just announced that we're going to get those show military trials with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and four others from Guantanamo Bay, where they won't be represented by a jury of their peers. No, we'll just have a judge and a military tribunal and say they did it after they'd been tortured for years. And that came out through what? WikiLeaks, through Assange and Manning, the tortures that were happening at Guantanamo Bay, Abu Ghraib, and other black sites. So when we want to get into questions about 9/11, they're plentiful. I mean, we could take a look at the hijackers themselves, and many of them were trained at U.S. Air Force bases and other military installations, including the Defense Language School in Monterey, California. We had a school in Pensacola, Florida. We also had Maxwell Air Force Base. Khalid al-Mihdhar, who was one of the supposed lead hijackers, I believe, on 77. He lived with and rented from an FBI informant and was protected before the attacks. Absolutely. In fact, James Woods, the actor, was on a plane, actually Flight 11, the plane that's supposed to hit the World Trade Centers first. And he reported that Al-Mihdhar, another person who had been identified, and two others that he couldn't say were of the 19 hijackers, were going to hijack that plane. And it's not like nothing was done. He talked to the stewardess, he talked to the pilot. Everybody in August, right before these attacks, actually made a report, and nothing was done. That was confirmed by another FBI source, and Seymour Hersh. That came out recently through the Dark Overlord data dump that was announced on the 1st of January. So there's still a lot of details out there to come. But again, you look at these guys, Muhammad Atta, for instance, he was tracked by Anthony Schaefer and the Able Danger team. You had Robert Wright of the FBI following the Saudi money, the Pakistani money that was coming in prior to 9/11, trying to go to officials and talk about the bin Laden network and how it was financed in a program called Vulgar Betrayal, and no one would listen to him. After the fact, they get Michael Chertoff on the phone, and Chertoff, who eventually becomes the first head of Homeland Security, says he doesn't want to hear about any conspiracy theories regarding 9/11. It took 16 years just to get the Saudi financing, a very little bit of that information, into the public arena. I mean, the questions surrounding 9/11 are really endless, and that's why I've made two feature films about it.
What's insane, though, is that the funding through the Pakistani ISI has been public record nearly the entire time.
Yeah,
Like, if I'm not wrong, it was pretty early on where people were like, even senators and other members, high-ranking government officials, were talking fairly openly about, yeah, we know that money went in through Pakistan. We know it's specifically generated through the ISI. And then you've got bin Laden, who was supposed to be hanging out in Pakistan, like in a hospital with a security detail, like the day before 9/11.
And all those things that you just said are absolutely 100% confirmed. So let's look at that on its face. First of all, bin Laden, if you believe these official narratives, has more to do with Pakistan than any other nation, not Afghanistan, not Saudi Arabia, not Iraq, not Iran, Pakistan. Let me give you an example. When we were running military operations against the Soviets with the freedom fighters, that was openly the bin Laden network and the Pakistani military and ISI. That relationship continued on. General Mahmoud Ahmed is the one who wired $100,000 to Mohammed Atta. Again, if you believe that official narrative, that would be 1/5 of the funding. The 9/11 Commission finds these attacks were financed for less than $500,000. Complete lie, but whatever. We see $100,000 coming from this gentleman. He's in DC the week of 9/11. He's meeting with George Tenet, the head of the CIA. He met with Condoleezza Rice, who denied it, and it later came out in public record. And on the morning of 9/11, he's meeting with Porter Goss and Bob Graham, who will head the initial congressional investigation into 9/11. Porter Goss will later become the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, he facilitates this wire from a guy named Omar Saeed Sheikh. This man will later be convicted of beheading Daniel Pearl in that initial scare video, when Daniel Pearl went overseas to look at the funding mechanisms of terrorism. Now, let's bring it full circle to the 2020 elections and Joey B, aka Joe Biden. Back when he was a senator in Delaware on September 13th, he brags about sitting down in a meeting with General Mahmoud Ahmed, who he identifies as the most powerful or the second most powerful man in Pakistan, and says, basically, I told him that if they don't work with us, we're going to go after him militarily. You can watch that interview. Brian Gumbel introduces it. He talks tough on the Senate floor. When he was running for the presidency in 2008, twice, Luke Rudowski of We Are Change, who I've worked with, and its Fabled Enemies, confronted him about this. He admitted that Pakistan and the ISI had a classified role in 9/11, and there is utter silence up there with his competitors. If any one of those people was serious about fighting the quote unquote war on terror or winning that election, the first thing they would do is confront Joe Biden on meeting with one of the funders of 9/11 and working with the terrorists. After all, like you said, on 9/10, CBS and Dan Rather did an in-depth report where they put multiple witnesses on camera that bin Laden was not only in a hospital inside of Pakistan, but being protected by the Pakistani military. So, I mean, come on. That's a real connection to bin Laden. And that's been obfuscated by the public to the public to this day, almost 20 years later. And it's vomitous. It's disgusting.
And it just circles back to the entire culture that we have here with American politics, which is cover up the bad stuff, play the identity card, and just get your base riled up, and nothing else matters. Where the truth is completely discarded. Like, you won't see candidates actually telling you the truth no matter what side they're on. Like, the moment a candidate sits down to talk about 9/11, it's just all, oh, these people attacked us. And we attacked us. We funded those people that attacked us. We brought them into the country. We allied with them in the 70s and built an empire with them since then. So it's we who attacked ourselves that day to strip our liberties. And any candidate in politics that isn't willing to say that is someone that's just not worth support, in my opinion.
Well, it's tough, right? Because you have Tulsi Gabbard sitting up there, and I think she's got her problems. I don't like her gun rights stuff. I don't like that she's a Council on Foreign Relations member. I can't agree with all of her policies. And I certainly don't like how she introduces herself as somebody who joined the military to fight al-Qaeda, although I understand how she's framing it. I am encouraged when she stands up there and says, You know, this administration and the one before it are working with Al Qaeda in Syria, Al Nusra, the White Helmets, all these offshoot groups against Assad. We're working with them. So it boggles my mind that Trump puts out a flex that he was going to meet with the Taliban in Camp David and possibly have peace talks, which he should have done, when you know our top military officials are in cahoots with the very quote unquote enemy of America, I guess, the people that pulled off 9/11 in Syria. And when Tulsi Gabbard pointed that out on stage, it was crickets. Nobody said a word, and the moderators moved on. Later on, when she was challenged about it by Anderson Cooper, I mean, she owned Anderson Cooper, but what was the talking point again and again? But Assad's a bad person that gasses his own people. But Assad's an awful dictator, right, Tulsi? But you're in agreement that Assad's a dictator, right? You know, they make you play that card. And that's why partisan politics, I don't know if I can curse on this show.
You may.
Yeah, it's utter horse.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, I mean,
you guys hear me, by the way?
And it's bullshit.
No.
They own both sides. I mean,
you can.
What's that?
Sure. Oh. I wanted to make sure you could hear me. And
yeah,
I was just saying that, yes, you can swear on the show. Awesome. Perfect. Yes. Go ahead. I'm sorry I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. But that's it. I mean, you got them trying to promote like Pete Bootlicker there, Buttigieg or whatever, because he's a military guy and he says he's going to get us out of Afghanistan. Well, Trump said he was going to get us out of Afghanistan. Obama said he was going to get us out of Afghanistan. Obama said he was going to shut down Guantanamo Bay. That's not even on the table anymore on the left. That's never even mentioned. They're like, hurrah for the show trials. That's how far gone we are politically, man. And, you know, that's why I've always said it's not about left or right. It's about right and wrong. And right now, there is very, very little truth in the world. I mean, you look at this administration, right? And all these supporters of it. He's going to take down the deep state. And don't get me wrong. I cheered yesterday when Bolton got fired, right? But he twice promised us the JFK papers. Now, I've done enough research on John F. Kennedy and the assassination to tell you that military intelligence, the Secret Service, the FBI, and the CIA, aspects of them, the actual deep state, were involved in that. And the documentation, even now, pretty much shows that beyond a reasonable doubt. But twice, he failed to give that to us. If you can't show the world who the deep state was 50 plus years ago when they took a president's life, how in the fuck are you going to even take them on in any respect today? So all these people that think someone's going to come in with a superhero cape and save the world, that's not how it works. We got to keep pushing for guys like Assange and say that this 14-count indictment is a complete fraud and the end of any kind of freedom of speech and journalism in the world if we allow this to take place. And that's a very real thing.
The interesting thing, too, with Jeremy Hammond recently being taken to the Eastern District of Virginia, the same prison that Chelsea Manning's in, we may see more charges open up outside of the time frame that's given for the extradition charges, because Jeremy Hammond was involved in the global intelligence files, which there isn't actually any indictments against Julian for right now, public indictments against Julian for. So that's an interesting thing, too, because British law requires, I think it's like a 37-day period where you're allowed to introduce additional charges and crimes. And then once that period ends, you can't put another charge forward. So with Jeremy Hammond getting moved now, it kind of shows that the whole thing with Chelsea Manning didn't work, and they're going to have to try to find a new way to keep him in prison, and then maybe even have to open up a whole new extradition case to be able to reintroduce these more crimes. And that's just my opinion. I don't have any facts or proof, but just kind of back on that topic of government transparency, the grand jury trials are the biggest show trial perjury traps that have ever been put in place in this country, and it's insane.
Well,
yeah, I never even thought of it. I never thought of it that way, Andrew. They could be using that because they're seeing this other tactic with Chelsea Manning potentially not working. But you're right. They do have a limited window of time where they could still add additional charges. However, I do believe that the nature of the extradition treaty with the UK is such that once that date, that hearing date and court date approaches, it makes it a lot more difficult for them to pile on more charges. But again, the nature of that treaty is a pretty good one if you are trying to charge somebody with more crimes.
Yeah, they had, he was arrested April 11th, and I believe they had 60 days to introduce the indictments against him. If there are more, I'm not sure the legality of introducing those, or if they would wait till they bring him here and try to win this extradition trial, bring him here, and then perhaps introduce more. We all know the UK is obviously not even following their own sovereignty and their own laws with this. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if something scoots through and new charges get piled on here.
Well, to speak to the perjury trap issue, right? I mean, look at the quote unquote Russiagate failure. If you look at that, that's all that ever was. Let's put pressure on Trump's people. We know that he had nothing to do with Russia because we know the leaks didn't come from Russia. And I'm not sure whether or not you guys went through that report, but there's very, very small section on Seth Rich and Assange pushing conspiracy theories about Seth Rich, et cetera, trying to promote that idea. And yet they never interviewed Assange. They never had anybody go into the consulate, as an intelligence asset and interview him and talk to that. None of that is in the report. And instead, they just try to pass it off that Assange was promoting conspiracy theories. And then in the actual indictments on Assange, they try to say, well, he encouraged these people by putting out rewards or tweets asking for information for them to hack him. And that's what makes him a cyber terrorist. All of these things are extremely dangerous. After all, the Russian collusion failed in such a manner, they made half of that report about what? Obstruction of justice for a crime that was never actually committed. And we're going to have, politicians out there voting for impeachment hearings or an impeachment investigation. And so this saga of distraction continues. And people still believe this narrative that somehow Putin hacked our elections. I mean, it's absolute madness. So the reality narrative that's out there on Main Street is already so twisted. You wonder where you can start with normal people on both sides of the political spectrum to get them to look at the real issues.
Well, it's part getting Trump supporters who may support Julian Assange, may support the idea of a free pass, to admit that Donald Trump and his Justice Department are the people that brought forth the extradition charges against him. If you are supporting those actions, you're not at all supportive of Julian. So, like once they can kind of wrap their heads around that a little bit, then you can transition over to the centrist motherfuckers, who by and large are kind of a lost cause, but you can give them the argument that Obama used ultimately to pass on the extradition, which was what they called the New York Times problem, which is exactly what would happen if you prosecuted Julian Assange under the Espionage Act. You would then be able to go after any publisher of any outlet, regardless of whether or not they were American, for printing something that the government didn't like.
Yeah. And it's another case where why did they, when there's so much corruption and there's so much failure out there to prosecute the big dogs for this corruption when they actually get caught? Obviously, the Hillary emails are the proof of that. And even now, with the outward failure, even with Trump tweeting about Clinton body counts, et cetera, Epstein, talk about a failure to take down the deep state. If we can't protect the most high-profile American prisoner this country has ever seen, I can't think of a more high-profile guy that was in our prison system. Maybe Noriega, but he wasn't an American citizen. This guy, if you believe the official account, had more than $500 million in assets, probably more hidden, because after that initial indictment, the judge did not believe they were giving a real accounting of what he had. He had intelligence connections, according to Vicky Ward. He had that passport. There were talks of him working with Adnan Khashoggi, who was the main arms dealer during Iran-Contra. And the way that worked was you had this Saudi businessman who was buying weapons from Czechoslovakia and Poland, then selling them to Israel and Mark Rich through Mossad connections, then being shipped down to South America and to the Contras, and then our drugs would come up via CIA planes. And all of this was outed. Very little is talked about today, but that network was more than likely connected to Epstein, and it's no wonder that he was buddy-buddy with Prince Andrew. It wasn't just because they were both into young girls. Prince Andrew is the United Kingdom's arms dealer. He's the one cutting deals with Saudi Arabia. You know, like we cut deals with Saudi Arabia when they want to bomb Yemen, when it's our bombs and we pick the targets. I mean, that's the world we live in, and most people have no idea of our military involvement in Yemen. And the fact that this president, when he first comes in, does a $400+ billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia after criticizing them, and then one of the few things that both the Congress and Senate are able to do that's good, which is get us out of that, and even that had a loophole, by the way. When it went through Congress, if it was a joint Israeli op, they would still allow it. But what happens? We'll veto that. We won't let the people have what they want. We won't stop these wars of aggression or the military-industrial complex profits that come with it. So we live in a real sick world, man. And that, you know, so many people don't even care. They care about their stupid celebritard culture and being on fucking Snapchat all day and their Instagram posts and what they ate for lunch. And I don't get it. You know, I just don't get it. I understand that social media is communication, but just like any other tool, like a hammer, you can build a house, you can bash someone's head in. So I try to use my social media to empower people with information. I put out links, stories, obviously the videos that I do, but I'm not trying to enslave myself to a camera and a lifestyle that is really utterly fake. You know, it's a facade. I used to run a bar, man. Before I got back into this, I ran a college bar, and I can't tell you how many times I sat behind the bar and watched a group of, 3 super hot chicks take 20 pictures or 20 different videos of them having the best time when 5 minutes ago, they couldn't have cared less till they whipped that camera out. They all looked miserable. So, we live in a real fake reality that's pushed out there. I mean,
do you think that's intentional to kind of numb people from the reality? And I would assume that you do, as I do, and I think everybody on this panel definitely feels that way. Can you kind of speak to that also after you finish up your next point?
Yeah, I mean, really, the point is that, like yesterday, when you and I and a lot of other people, and this made me happy, were awake enough to say John Bolton's fired, and he was the #1 trend on Twitter, right? That was pretty cool. What wasn't cool, it was iPhone 11 took it right over right after that press conference. It's got 3 cameras. Oh my God. So we're so obsessed with designer technology, not even the best technology that's out there, but what we're sold as the best technology. And it's gotten to the point now where, one of these demigods that we're being sold on is Elon Musk. He's really dangerous. He's pushing Neuralink as a device that we're all going to have implanted in our brains. This is DARPA level shit.
Oh no, he's the good billionaire. He's the benevolent, kind billionaire with a space program and the Neuralink and fucking but he's the good one because you don't hear stories about him actively screwing over his workers like Bezos does, and that's what
he doesn't look like a Bond villain.
Right.
Yeah.
So an interesting story. Someone I know through the Green Party, her son worked at the Tesla plant here in Ohio fixing cars. And he said that it's actually the direct opposite of trying to be a terrible workplace, where they try to just be like overcompensational to build team spirit, to where 3 times a day they had group huddles and they would always have to like meet up before they went and fixed cars, and just all of these things that you don't make mechanics do because they're there to just get their hands dirty, fix something, and go home. So it's funny that he's underpaying employees, not offering full benefits, and then at the same time making them do this like artificial fucking team building inside of their like car repair shop. So it's the craziest thing.
Well, when you're building a cult, man, I've worked in those kind of like environments where everybody's hurrah, and they're trying to the team meetings are there, and everything's about Taco Tuesday or wacky sweater day, or it's terrible. It's soul crushing. That was a soul crushing gig for me. But speaking of Musk, because I really do think he's important. I'm glad you brought up Bezos, right? Bezos is this other outward guys into space. He's in your home. In fact, I just did a piece on the new, I think it's called Facebook. Man, I'm going to butcher it. It starts with a P. I know that the Google version is the Nest Hub Max. And then there's another device by Facebook. These are facial recognition devices. They're going to put in phones with homes with small screens. It's going to be the biggest thing this Christmas. It's there to replace your Alexa and all these smart speakers. And it's so you can talk to grandma, et cetera, et cetera. But it's going to be building data profiles on you and your family like never before, even bigger than the ones that are being built with this device through the Track Trace Database Society. And think about it. Once we are hooked in with some type of brain chip, I mean, when you think about what Musk is doing, he wants to thread 4 tiny holes into your skull, put synthetic fiber in there, and then a device behind your ear that is activated through Bluetooth that allows you to control your computer, right? Like a mouse, and do different searches, et cetera, et cetera. They've already done this with mice. They've already done this with monkeys, and that's Tesla. And believe me, DARPA's been doing this stuff forever. Here's the thing. There's no reason
DARPA has a video from like 2010 where they took a chimpanzee, completely restrained him in a chair, hooked a chip up to his brain that was connected to a mechanical arm, and starved him for 2 weeks. And essentially the starvation created a new neurological pathway that allowed him to reach out with the mechanical arm to grab the banana that was like molding in front of him. So they've had this technology for a long time, and it's, to me, perfected to the point that they're just going to be able to make mind slaves.
Well, Andrew, you made a great point too. You said in the past with these chips too, and people getting chips implanted in their hand, you said that you believe that, with a credit card and they say, they ask for your chip, that's kind of getting people used to this idea of having a chip. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I remember, Andrew, you said that when we were driving and we had to, use a credit card to pay the tolls to get into Chicago. And I thought that was a great point. They're going to make things like this. If you don't have it, and if you don't adhere to this new technology, they make it such an inconvenience to the point where you have no choice but to adapt and to partake in these very scary methods of over surveillance.
That's what planned obsolescence is all about. That's why we get products that suck. That's why we get products that only last 8 months to 2 years max. I want to circle back for a second though, because I'm really glad, Jason, that you brought up Pete Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg is one of those CIA Democrats. You don't go to Jesuit private school, then Harvard, then suddenly work for John Kerry, then work for McKinsey, then become a naval intelligence officer. Like, that's without agency oversight in most of that. And Valerie Plame, while we're reminiscing on 9/11 and the Bush years, Valerie Plame now is running for Congress, and she's got this ad out that looks like it was directed by J.J. Abrams. It's got nothing in it regarding what she stands for or any of that shit. It's just, I'm straight up the CIA agent that Dick Cheney outed kind of feel to it. And when we've got intelligence community veterans openly running for congressional seats, Senate seats, when there's no public pushback from that, when the American public feels safer because there's a goddamn spook as their congressman, we've got work to do in terms of changing that narrative.
I agree 100%. In fact, most people probably don't believe or remember Valerie Plame. I mean, most people didn't even remember Scooter Libby's name when Trump pardoned him. And he was one of the few people to actually go down during that very, very corrupt administration. And, focusing away from Valerie Plame, who I think you're probably right, will have a successful political career, into a new young intelligence officer, a knock, if you will, that's now being pushed by the media. But I forget what her first name is. It might be Amarella, but Fox is her last name. And she has a new book out there where she details how she worked for the Central Intelligence Agency. She posed as an international art dealer. There's that art connection again we talk about with Epstein. I mean, when you talk about Les Wexner, for example, the man that gave him a $77 million mansion, a lot of people are like, oh, he's just the limited guy, and oh, he's just Victoria's Secret. Well, no, he's got the Wexner Group, and the Luntz report was actually leaked to the public after the fall of Saddam, where they were laying out how Israel had wanted this war on terror and how they could keep pushing it forward after the fall of Saddam, and how they would use certain talking points and family perspectives to gain more of a foothold in the Middle East and more support for this war that, as we know, expanded from Afghanistan and Iraq into Libya and Syria and AFRICOM and beyond.
The amount of ramping up that we've done in Africa over the last decade, and the fact that it doesn't get covered, is tremendously shocking, because AFRICOM, as a division of the military, has been working overtime for going on like 5 or 6 years now. We've got proxy wars in something like 17 countries. It's fucking out of hand.
And that's the Obama administration. And again, there's not one person that will bring that up out of the 20 candidates on stage during this presidential election. How many people brought? First of all, it's stunning to me that they can wait an hour and a half to an hour and 50 minutes of a 2-hour or so debate before they even bring up any foreign policy, and nobody seems to care. Everybody cares about climate politics or gender politics or identity nonsense or the very real issue of healthcare. But when we're talking about real lives that can be taken at any moment, or actual racism by the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives that we take every year in these second and third world nations that we decide to liberate, none of that is talked about. And AFRICOM has never even been whispered by the mainstream media or any of the candidates up there.
I want to, if I could real quick, because I know that you're kind of on short time. One of the themes we have on the Vigil series here is decentralized activism. And that is, basically you as an individual, or you with a small group of people that you have known forever and trust, going out and doing an action that you know that you will not be infiltrated for. And that if we can get people to go out and do these actions like en masse, but only within their own little decentralized units, then we can successfully push the narrative into the public consciousness, regardless of the fact that we're being censored around every single corner, and that we have 6 companies that own 95% of all media, which include a lot of the quote unquote independent outlets.
Well, I think the first key is try to get a new decentralized internet. You know, if we've got to keep relying on this one, the grip's only going to get tighter, right? And the technology is out there. That's what we really need. And I'm not just talking about a Tor browser or the dark web. We need a decentralized platform where we can communicate globally. Because right now, the one that we've got is under such massive censorship and control through these large corporations, like you said. It's tough. You know, if you look at how 9/11 truth and activism in that regard really flourished, it was those little small groups of 4 or 5 people in a day and age where you burned 100 DVDs and you handed them out on street corners. Or in the days of the flip phone, you know, when I had that first Razor that played video too, showing somebody a video of Building 7. And all of that is still possible, but the viral nature of the fruits of our labor, you know, the confrontations with the Zbigniew Brzezinskis and the Dick Cheneys and the Robert Gibbs and the Bill Clintons, they're just not as possible anymore due to these algorithms. And that's what nobody really wants to talk about. They want to frame it in this left-right, oh, they're censoring conservatives debate. No, every single one of my videos, every one top to bottom, is demonetized out of the gate and up for manual review, whether it's appropriate or not. Why? Because that takes my traffic down by 50 to 80% out of the gates. They admit that. They brag about that. They say, look what a great job we've done. Now, it doesn't matter that at the end of the day, you know, about 60% of my material at this point, you know, the Epstein stuff definitely took a bunch down, but 60% of my material gets remonetized. It's appropriate for viewers. I'm not spitting hate. I'm not calling for violence. In fact, I got nothing but love in my heart. I want to bring people in. I want to bring people in from all sides. We got to have more conversations. And the fact that the media loves to focus on the battle between the Proud Boys and Antifa, which is
Jesus.
0.0001% of any fucking political spectrum out there, should show you how they push divisiveness and kind of a false narrative to begin with.
Right. Like, if you're someone standing on a platform of anti-fascism, which is important, you're not fighting in the streets. You're fighting at the gates of the technocracy. Like, that's, and I'm a nonviolent person. Like, I don't advocate for violence, but if you're someone who does look at your strategy and be like, well, this is kind of dumb, like, we're not accomplishing anything. And from an actual global perspective, we're just making ourselves look stupid. So I don't even understand them as a strategic unit, let alone as someone actually trying to affect change throughout the world.
Because they're not a
that
strategic
changed.
unit. What they are is a fucking goddamn. I've said it. Look, I've said this on my show. I'll say it here. If you can prove to me that for every member of Antifa, every like skinny jean wearing 108-pound warrior, there's not 1 to 1.5 on average members of some law enforcement agency, I will come to your house and labor free, I will put an addition on whatever room you want.
Well, I see your point, right? Because there's not that many of them. And how are you ever going to affect change by billy clubbing somebody or throwing a milkshake on him? Let me tell you what the real danger of that group is, other than the media hype about it. It's the alternative media buying into the fact that these are terrorists and they need to be labeled as terrorist groups. Abso-fucking-lutely not. No, you need to find individuals that break the law, because again, we're not trying to take people's freedom of speech away, right? People that are violent need to be arrested for their violence and prosecuted for their violence. If you swing a lock at somebody's head, that's manslaughter. You should be charged with such. You're not a terrorist. Why are we trying to make political groups in this country and American citizens who are not trying to affect high-level political change? The guy they're swinging at the lock at, he's making maybe $20,000 to $80,000 a year. He's certainly not part of the predator class you're trying to stand up against. So it's all framed in bullshit to continue to take away our freedoms and label more and more people terrorists, in my opinion. That's the real danger.
Well, it's a vehicle for censorship. It's a vehicle for deplatforming, because you can point to the people who are defending Proud Boys or are defending Antifa, and you can go, look, their content is promoting hate speech, and you have to take them away. And if you argue that people shouldn't be arbitrarily deplatformed because of complaints by a fucking tech monopoly, then you're a free speech absolutist, and I can't stand you. And that's the conversation that they want people to have, because as long as we're doing that, we're not looking at them.
You know, again, when you're not looking at the real issues, it benefits those at the top. And like I said, when I see the media hype around the Proud Boys and Antifa, it's laughable to me. But then again, when I watch the candidates that are up there in 2020 and the talking points, it's such bizarro world from, you know, the left that I knew, at least during the Bush administration, that was outraged that we were in Iraq, that was outraged that this war was going to continue, that knew that weapons of mass destruction weren't there, that wanted Guantanamo Bay closed, that gave people like Cindy Sheehan a voice, that were actually praising Julian Assange and his ilk for leaking this type of documentation. We've gotten so far away from that. It's been flipped upside down on his head. And I can only hope that through, you know, independent voices like you guys, like hopefully myself, Media Roots is out there, James Corbett is out there. I always respected Abby Martin's work. She has a new film on Gaza out there. But the very nitty-gritty independent media voices that aren't catering to an audience, that aren't sensationalizing things, that aren't talking about the documents the Q snuck them on the toilet while they're eating chili. You know, the bullshitters out there, get rid of them. You know, call them out for what they are and their lies. When they do good work, praise them. You know, I'll give David Icke some credit. I'm not a lizard person shapeshifter, but he's kept his anti-war stance. I'll give him that all day, baby. You know, he sold out.
Just said not too long ago, because somebody asked me, like, so what do you really think about all this? You know, what's your take on the whole Epstein thing in like one sentence? And I said, I think that a lot of people owe David Icke an apology.
Well, I'll tell you what, here's a kind of story to end it on because my time's running short. But for instance, there's a guy out there named Lord Mountbatten.
Yep.
Lord Mountbatten was basically the uncle of Prince Charles, and he mentored him. He also, according to recently released FBI documents, was a serial pedophile for over 30 years. He was also blown up, supposedly by the IRA, with one of his boat boys, who was either 14 or 15 years old, according to those reports. And on the anniversary of this recently in Europe, they were running documentaries praising this guy and the loss he was to his family. He was a serial fucking pedophile. Jimmy Savile was a serial fucking pedophile who not only raped children, but raped corpses in hospice, according to the investigations. This is somebody who held big checks with the establishment, people like Margaret Thatcher and Prince Charles, on behalf of kids. We need to wake the fuck up and realize that in 2019, it's absurd that we even have royalty, let alone a predator class that would allow this. How in the world can we sit here and talk about any kind of democracy or constitutional republic or any organization of justice when we have pure and out nepotism via rule by bloodline that is so outward in places like Europe and Saudi Arabia, for instance, that there seems to be no way around it? It's insane. It's 2019. That shit needs to end.
Yeah.
So I just want to say real quick that part of the goal for the Free Assange Vigils and for Action for Assange in general is to try to create a space for nonviolent activism again, because that's been so diminished and so infiltrated and so beat down. And we have tons of events coming up throughout the world. There's a Candles for Assange event going on, and that's basically just like a global vigil event right now that has, I want to say, at least 15 cities around the globe going on. And then there's the climate strikes that are coming up and just a bunch of other big protests out there. If you could, or if you get the chance, don't forget to cover the protests that are happening around the world. And I know you probably do. I haven't got to like pick through your video stuff too much yet. But if you could, just as these larger events are coming, talk about them, because it's so hard to get people to talk about the Candles for Assange events and to get people to even just say, hey, could you host your own? Or if you're interested in hosting your own, go to this website. So I think if we tried to create some way of spreading events around to be able to filter that out, I think that would be a really cool thing to do.
I think you're 100% correct. And it's a shame that Assange has been marginalized and demonized in the media, and the only place that we can hear a voice that's on his side is on The View, while Pamela Anderson is attacked by Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, and the demoness Meghan McCain over lies on Assange. And we have to go to daytime television even to hear about his plight and his case, and look to a celebrity, Pam Anderson, to talk about it. She mentions Pilger, but Pilger's not getting a platform in this country. And, again, they marginalize what Waters and Pilger recently did for Assange. And what do they want to promote? They want to promote the fictitious land group that's going to go raid Area 51. I mean, talk about horse shit, man. I mean, come on. That's like, when I saw that, I thought it was a joke. And what if people think it's a party? But that's the kind of thing the media gets behind. Not, getting behind a true hero of freedom of speech like Julian Assange. So you just send me the links via Twitter. I will be following you from now on so we can DM back and forth more and more. And I'd love to have any of you guys on my program to discuss this as well, because it's one of those subjects that does not get discussed enough and is barely grazing the mainstream media. And when it does, it's usually in a negative perspective towards Assange.
You're exactly right, Jason. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are really grateful to have you on. You are welcome back at any time. And before you do head out, and Steve, if you do want to jump in, make sure, Jason, that before you do close out, that you give a brief final statement if you would like, and then also let everybody know where they can find you.
Sure. To me, it's not about left or right. It's always been about right and wrong. I take on both sides. I don't even see this as a technocracy anymore. It is a technopoly. There is a predator class out there, and they need to be exposed. They can no longer be in power. So you can check out all of my documentary films for free: Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies, Invisible Empire, A New World Order Defined, and Shade the Motion Picture, over at my channel right here, where I'm doing 3 to 7 videos a day. If you go to the playlist section and documentaries, you can watch all of them, as well as my work on Epstein, my interviews, and even the Dark Overlord 9/11 files, and much more. So thank you guys again, and I'll see you guys on the flip side.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. All right, everybody. So we are going to continue on with the vigil. We are going to touch on some news that has been going on this past week. And then we're also going to be showing you a little bit later 3 video clips that highlight very important whistleblowers who were whistleblowers involving what happened on 9/11. But before we do all of that, Christy, I'm going to hand it over to her, because we did have a video clip that we did together about Pam Anderson and about her appearance on The View. And we have some maybe potential ideas that we could do in the future, maybe make it a regular thing. So Christy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, so we just want to acknowledge all the feedback that we have gotten for doing this segment on Pam Anderson's The View interview last week. We have over 700 views on that video alone. It's a lot of views in just maybe 48 hours. Taylor, I think by the time the video went up, it was not up that long, and we got a lot of retweets. We had a lot of female Free Assange supporters echo our sentiments and felt very empowered and seen by the things we were saying. One thing I did want to bring up, because we didn't even get a chance to get into it, is another perspective. Many of the Free Assange movement supporters are mothers. And I've seen a lot of posts talking about the motherhood perspective of being involved in this movement, as far as, what if this was my son? What if this was somebody, looking at it from that perspective of, this is somebody's child. What if this happens to other children? What if this gets out of control and continues to happen? Not only thinking about the state of the world, but specifically the human rights that are being violated in this instant, in Julian Assange's case, and bringing that open to, Chelsea Manning and whistleblowers that are being tortured essentially and put back in prison. And Jeremy Hammond is our newest example of somebody being abused by the system in order to get them to testify over things they have, either already talked about in their trial, like Chelsea Manning, or, Jeremy Hammond has nothing else further to add to the record. So I just want to acknowledge that is another very popular perspective of females in this movement that personally, for me, I was inspired by Mrs. Assange and her Twitter account. And that's kind of what got me rallied up to start finding actions to do, was seeing her tweets and hearing them from a perspective of a mother. That my maternal side clicked in, and what if this was my son? So it's just been really great, all the feedback we've been getting. If you haven't seen the video, you can go to ActionForAssange on YouTube, where we're streaming now, and you can check out that video of Taylor and I's discussion. And if there are other things you want to hear a female perspective from, Taylor and I would love to address those. And we would love any more feedback from you guys.
Yeah, we were even thinking maybe making this like a weekly thing, if there was some content that we could cover that kind of relates to women and female supporters of Julian Assange, that Christy and I could kind of, do together and really kind of take control of, I guess. So let us know if you guys would be interested in that. If you have other suggestions for us, do let us know, like Christy was saying, because that video did well, and we're happy about that, because we know that it reached you guys and that you were able to really connect with our message and what we were saying. And we're just going to get stronger if we keep connecting with each other in this way. So again,
and I would say the overall message I'm getting is, you control us, you can harass us, you can smear us and call us names, but the females of the Free Assange movement are not going anywhere. We're going to grow stronger, and I think this is really, this discussion is just beginning, and I think it's unifying us. And I think we're kind of sick of all the harassment online. So stay tuned for more.
Yes, I agree with that. Absolutely. So like I was saying earlier, do let us know what you would like to see from us, because we definitely want to continue doing that and make it our own little segment that we do together, and just have that be a very women-based Assange supporter type of segment. But anyways, I do want to move on to some of the news. Steve, I know that you were talking about an article in The Guardian, or something related to The Guardian, so I will hand it over to you.
So this is out of a website called the Daily Maverick, but it is about the complete compromising of the Guardian as an outlet. I'm gonna quote on and off here from this, but according to the minutes of UK's Defence and Security Media Advisory Committee, the revelations caused alarm. This is the revealing related to Snowden's drop, mass surveillance. The revelations caused alarm in British security services and Ministry of Defense. What they did is uh, they started passing out these things called D notices. They were known as the D notice committee, um, and they held these basically talking point seminars where journalists would present what they were going to report on, and then they would decide whether or not it was a pass or fail, whether they could talk about it. The Guardian fought it for a while, um, but the D-Notice committee was putting massive pressure on them, and around 2013 they folded like wet cardboard. Um, there was a visit to the Guardian's offices where they leaned on him, where they leaned on who does not say whose balance. I'm sorry, I was reading this really quickly. Um, there we go. When it came time to report, I'm sorry guys, this is my computer's jumping around on me real quick. Um, through massive pressure on the part of the British government, the Guardian began being more and more compliant with MI5 and MI6, to the point to where the MI5 chief was telling people um, that he would rather talk to the Guardian rather than any other newspaper, despite the publication of the Snowden files.
And that just speaks to the level of corruption with the media. Like, they're literally just in league with the military industrial complex to go after people or specific organizations, or to just omit certain stories so the public doesn't hear about them, or if it has to break, hear about it in a certain way. So that's something we see in the American media and the American intelligence community too, like with Jeff Bezos owning, I think it's the Washington Post, or I believe, and he gets literally
Yeah.
builds right next to the Pentagon, gets a multi-million dollar, I think it's like $400 million a year contract now to build servers for them. And they're literally just walking hand in hand together, and no one's throwing out the red flag trying to stop that like union.
$600 million.
Yeah, and it's disgusting.
$600 million. Not I the Guardian, if you remember, was the outlet that published that blatant fabricated piece of propaganda by Luke Harding, that alleged with zero evidence whatsoever that Paul Manafort had visited Julian Assange in the embassy. Um, the Guardian was also publishing uh, falsified documents through Ecuador. The Guardian, as we know from Mark Davis, is the outlet that set up Julian Assange and hung him out to dry to begin with, and was going to let 10,000 names go unredacted and pin it on him.
And they also released a password in a book that a few of the Guardian journalists had worked on together. I believe they they did reveal the password, yet at the same time they tried to flip it around and pretend as if they were the ones who were concerned about concealing these individuals' identities, when really that's not the case. So the Guardian has for those who are unfamiliar with the history, there is the Guardian has not always been the best when it comes to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. They did once partner together and work closely together. However, the relationship did eventually fizzle out, and that was on the fault of the Guardian, because the journalists there were misleading and basically
they set him up. They
yeah, they did. And the New York Times
set him
did
up.
Too. It was there were and Der Spiegel, and I believe another, or no, it was those three.
The New York Times.
Those two. Yeah.
It was the Guardian, the New York Times, and Der Spiegel. And they were all working together to to make sure that they got accolades for publishing this information, but face zero consequences for doing it. And their fall guy throughout all of this was Julian Assange. When they wrote that smear book about him, that was the entire point, was to further diminish and assassinate the character of Julian Assange. By the time 2013 rolled around, and people were all of a sudden looking at the Snowden files and Glenn Greenwald, that was the perfect time to vilify Julian Assange, because he wasn't being looked at by the public as this guy who brought forth this brilliant and fascinating and terrifying information. He was hailed as a hero by several politicians early on. And so by publishing a smear book and by going and getting in bed with MI5, it allowed the Guardian and a couple of their writers to make a fantastic living as rented smear merchants for the intelligence community.
And Steve, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, I'm really sorry for bringing it back up, but like we know when we've talked on other shows about the the talk given by Mark Davis in Sydney earlier in August, he really gave us the firsthand perspective of how these reporters, especially the Guardian, were acting during this time period and who was really concerned about redactions. And from his perspective, Julian Assange was the only one that was concerned about redactions. The Guardian reporters were not. And in his perspective, from his firsthand views that he followed Julian this whole time period, was that yes, he was being turned into the fall guy for this, and he was being almost manipulated for this information, almost like this fake partnership between all these newspapers and WikiLeaks, and seemed almost premeditated, that they were kind of waiting to use and abuse him.
Well, what was that quote that he said from that absolute scumbag Davies, where they were talking back and forth about, like, right before they were going to go publish ahead of Julian, what about the names on this list? And the quote was, "We're not the ones who did this. We just published it." Just signifying that, yeah, this guy's head is on the line for this. We're just the innocent bystanders who fell into this information and got the green light to print it.
Right. And the New York Times, and I believe it was either the New York Times or the Guardian, one of them said to Assange too that they actually wanted WikiLeaks to be the first to publish this information. And Mark Davis, or Davis, viewed that as a red flag and something to be very concerned about. However, at that time, Julian Assange felt that there was a strong relationship between the three publishers and didn't see that as sort of something that he should be alarmed by. However, Mark Davis made the point that looking back on it now, it's almost chilling, because that's the very those are the very documents that he is in prison for right now.
Well, and it's the fact that he's getting charged with any of this goes to show how long this vendetta has been going on. Like, it doesn't matter how many times they drag people out that are tangentially connected to, like, Stratfor, like Jeremy Hammond, or people who were part of the Afghan War Diaries. It doesn't matter how many people they lock up. Nobody's going to talk. Nobody's going to walk into their perjury trap. The charges that they've levied against Julian Assange in this extradition warrant are spurious to make believe, but we don't, as the public, get to know what happens if he goes to court. John Kiriaku's made that very, very clear. Like, it's, matter of national security. Contrary to what all of the people who support Q think, this trial will not be held in public. It'll be behind closed doors. Julian Assange himself won't be allowed to view the evidence that's being used against him. It is a kangaroo court by a completely biased wing of the judiciary, and that includes the jury.
And national security is exactly why there are no indictments over Vault 7, because if they were to pursue indictments, they would have to start verifying some of these things. So it was more important to national security to just not acknowledge and not press any charges against WikiLeaks and Julian Assange for these than to actually pursue them.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Go ahead.
And cypherpunk actually is like literally the Julian's opinion on what is happening to him now. Like the first 2 or 3 chapters are completely focused on when they're going to pick him up and how they're going to pick him up, and the fact that Chelsea Manning is at risk, and that when he's detained, he understands that there's going to be this massive risk of torture because of the US justice system. And just to read the words that he said back in 2010 being as relevant as they were then as they are today, if not more, is pretty incredible and pretty powerful to me. So those books, if you don't have them, The Women in WikiLeaks, Cypherpunk, and When Google Met WikiLeaks, and I'm sure that there's a couple more, I would absolutely recommend you get those.
And Julian has been saying since before he was even in the embassy that they were going to be using the Espionage Act against him. And that was, people laughed at that. People thought he was being paranoid. The fact that he even went into the embassy was seen as this ridiculous paranoia. What is he doing? The US isn't, there's no secret grand jury. So, I mean, we've been going on 9 years now of Julian Assange predicting what the US was going to be doing and how they were going to pursue him, as well as these whistleblowers. And like I said, we have to say, once again, Julian Assange was right. And I'm sure this is not something he wanted to be right about, but here we are.
Yeah, his attorneys too, I remember they said that they were proven right. Once he was arrested and they found out that he was being charged with espionage, Jen Robinson, his main attorney, was saying to the media, unfortunately, what we've been saying for the past several years now has been proven to be correct. And it wasn't this hysteria and it wasn't this overreaction. But of course, they wanted, people to feel that way because they wanted him to leave the embassy on his own. In the last year that he had spent there, they were really pushing for that, of course, making the conditions increasingly more difficult and more unbearable.
Well, and it's not just that. When I had a guest on my show I was talking about earlier, that guy Sean O'Brien, and we had a conversation about somnambulant torture. And if you're unfamiliar with the conscious level, and it's something that both DARPA and the CIA have talked about, that they know how to do. It's more than likely that they were subjecting Julian Assange to this. They were trying to do it on water protesters with sonic cannons. Um, what he's endured just so we could have access to information that allows us to see the full picture of the governments and corporations that run this world, it is just beyond insane to me. And as Andrew says, like, if more people just knew, if you know about this, normal decent people would get the fuck upset about it. And that's what we're trying to do here, which is why the people that are watching should share this video and try and get more people to come along, and then we can all plan a decentralized action together.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Steve. I'm glad that you brought that up. It is important that we do get this message out there because there really isn't any other independent media that is specifically dedicated to the cause that we are dedicated to, pushing very strongly for decentralized activism. And of course, we would like everybody, watching and who is participating, in the chat with us to join us and do this with us. Like we may be separated by states, but we could still all do this together. And I'm glad that you brought that point up because we need to, work on maybe some, getting our message out there and our cause out there, because again, not to scare people, but there isn't a whole lot of time left. The extradition hearing is in February, and we that's not a lot of time. It sounds far away, February 2020, and that was done by design. Remember that too, but that really isn't a whole lot of time. And there are events that are going to be held in October that are very important and very symbolic. The anniversary of WikiLeaks is coming up, and there's going to be worldwide events being held. But even just beyond that, it's more than just these important landmark events and these important dates. This is something that needs to be done, consistently. And so make sure that you do, retweet us out. Make sure that you do share this video, like and subscribe, tweet at us, because that helps with this cause.
And Unity for J does a great job of promoting the actual protests that are out there right now, because there's so many cities that just hold small protests all the time that never get attention in independent media and will never ever get attention in mainstream media. So that's something that I think Christy and that team over there does just an awesome job of, is making sure that people can actually find their protests. And that's something that once we get our website kind of up and working again, we're going to strive towards. So some big dates coming up. I believe it is September 20th through the 23rd is supposed to be a whole bunch of different climate action events. And then I believe it is, Monday, September 23rd is the Strike DC event. We're not affiliated with them. I haven't reached out. I want to. But one thing to keep in mind with them is that's a big event. Like that's something where you have to have an eye out looking for potential things that could be provocateurs or agents or things like that. But at the same time, these are great ways to connect with people. So maybe reach out and try to find some local environmentalist groups that are having some events coming up during this next weekend and see if you can get alongside of them or join them to talk about this other issue and how it relates to it.
Oh, I do
But
want to make a shout out real quick to Intermedia Press. They just joined us. They are from Argentina. They said, "We are with you. Congratulations for everything you do to create public awareness." I just wanted to shout out to them because they've been supporting us since we launched this. Andrew, I know we've been connecting with them through ActionForAssange on Twitter. So thank you so much for watching. Hi, and we really appreciate your work and we appreciate your support. Go ahead. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to
you're
address
fine.
that.
And then another big period of action is October 4th through October 11th. So October 4th is the 13th anniversary of WikiLeaks' actual founding. And then October 11th is the 6-month date from when Julian Assange was taken from the Ecuadorian embassy and moved into Belmarsh prison. So there's Candles for Assange events being planned there. There's other activist groups that are planning things independently for that. So that's one of those things to just be on a lookout for, and hopefully by the end of this week, we can get our website up and running again. Well, not that it's completely down, but fixed, so that way we can get a list of those all up there.
I do want to make notice of September 28th. It's the last Saturday of the month. The Julian Assange Defense Committee out of London is holding an event. And a lot of times when they do, many of the major cities like to do a global action in solidarity, sorry, using that word, with them. So I know there are a few cities already that are starting to plan September 28th. So that is a date in between some of the dates Andrew mentioned. And again, if you have any dates you're planning, feel free to tag or send us a message at Unity for J, or you can tag me as well. And we can definitely help you promote them on Twitter to help people in your area see those events.
So Miss Joss just wrote out, she said, did you guys check out that Assange event on Facebook forming in DC for October 5th? I have not yet. I've been very, very busy. I did not forget about it. I will look into it once this, later on tonight. I will look at that, Miss Joss. Thank you so much for letting me know about it. And we will, try to promote, if we look at it and we see it's, legitimate, we'll, from then on, promote that event on Twitter as well. So thank you for reminding me about that.
And if you're interested, for everybody watching or that'll see this later, in hosting your own events or doing some type of decentralized activism, but aren't sure how or where or when, or just need some motivation and like the posters and tools, feel free to email us directly. It's ActionForAssange at protonmail.com. Feel free to reach out. We can help with posters. We can help with getting wristbands if you want to do wristbands, finding events, whether it's comedy shows that are coming up or political events or even just a community event nearby. Feel free to reach out to us if you want to get started but aren't really sure how to take that first step.
And to answer a question in the chat, Schultze, yes, there's absolutely a way to write to Julian Assange. If you are on Twitter, you can go to @WriteJulian and they have detailed instructions with a do and don't list. But you can also, if you just the address is Julian Assange, date of birth 3/07/1971, HMP Belmarsh, Western Way, London, United Kingdom. I can put that in the chat too. I think there's enough characters in there. But yeah, there are definitely things that you can't do. And that's obviously don't send anything sensitive, don't send a greeting card or a postcard or a package or loose stamps or cash, don't send books or magazines. When you do write your letter, you have to have the address exactly right. If you're going to send something to him, like, bear in mind you're trying to cheer a dude up. So, if you've done an action for Julian Assange, talk to him about that. Talk to him about some positive news that you heard about.
We have a video too about it, where Christy and Steve really highlight and provide some advice on how best to write the letters, what to include. They answer a lot of common questions. That is on our channel. You could check that out. One of the days that we were doing the vigil, a lot of people were asking questions about it. So we kind of laid it all out for you guys. So if you do, just, need some inspiration, you could check out that video. So I think that do we have any more news we want to touch on? Because we do have some, we have 3 videos that are related to 9/11, specifically highlighting the whistleblowers who were involved with revealing some very important information regarding on what happened that day. But before we do that, any news that we want to touch on?
I don't have the article in front of me and I haven't looked too much into it yet, just because I'm for time with work. But there was outside of Belmarsh prison shortly after meeting with Julian.
It was Vivian Westwood.
Right?
Yeah, Vivian Westwood.
Could you guys talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so Vivian Westwood is, she's gone to the embassy. She's a longtime friend of Julian Assange. They did a live stream, I think it was the night of the Brexit vote. She was on there speaking. So I think they've known each other for a number of years. I believe she said it took her a month to get in to visit him in Belmarsh, and just reiterated about him being in solitary confinement again, and absolutely saying he should not be extradited. Was there any other larger points we wanted to make about her speaking outside of Belmarsh?
Just the fact that it wasn't covered by anybody.
Yeah.
There was no mainstream media out there. If it wasn't for RT and other independent sources, we wouldn't have video of it. And same thing with Roger Waters, because the media has completely ignored that benefit concert that he did for him back on, I believe, Monday last week, Labor Day here in the United States. That's been completely blacklisted from any media outlet actually covering it. And same thing with this lady's interview too. So I think that those are important for us to try to get around and for us to get out to the independent media sources as well.
And then just because we usually do this, today marks 182 days in jail and $73,000 in fines for Chelsea Manning, who again is only in jail because in the United States, it's legal for the judge to put her back there if he thinks more time and more punitive fines will break her. But if he didn't think that it would break her, he would have to let her out. Like, that's how the law is written. Because
Yeah, he's totally allowed to do this. This is, not an abuse of power at all.
Insane.
I hope my sarcasm's coming through.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for giving that update. My video, or not video, but the audio did cut out in the beginning. I was having some issues with it. So didn't have the proper introduction today. And I think we were going to miss that point anyway. So thank you for addressing that. Do we want to maybe get into these videos? Is that what we're thinking? We have some short clips for you guys. Like I said, I think this may be the third time that I mentioned this, but again, they're super interesting. This is from the Corbett report, I believe. Some really good stuff. Now, these not articles, but these videos are not the full footage, but they're more than half of the footage. So you'll be seeing quite a bit of it, but I basically just took like the highlights and the main points for you guys. So we're going to play that, and then we're kind of going to talk about it. And then you guys also too, leave us your comments and the questions that you have for us, because this is some really interesting stuff. If you're not somebody that's, well versed on 9/11 and specifically, the alternative ideas of what could have potentially happened on that day. This is some really interesting stuff. And I know, Andrew, you are really passionate about this in particular. I think he left us for a minute.
No, I'm still here. I'm sorry.
You are. Okay.
Yeah, I was responding to a message. I apologize.
Okay. No, you're fine.
But yeah, so I want to start with, because this is a whole little thing that we put together here, just with the video from NIST. And for those of you who don't know what NIST is, it's a regulatory agency in a way that rates the performance of industrial grade steel for buildings and boats and all those kinds of fun things. So I just want to start us out with talking about that a little bit. So I'm going to get that video pulled up here, because they were the agency that was tasked with rating World Trade Center 7 and the other towers that went down on 9/11. So let me pull this up here real quick. And then if anyone could let me know how the audio is. I think I have it working right, but I just want to make sure that it's not echoey.
New York City, 2001. No tall building had ever collapsed primarily due to fire. But that's exactly what investigators believe happened to the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 on September 11th. According to a 3-year comprehensive building and fire safety investigation just completed by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires. We really have a new kind of progressive collapse that we have discovered here, which is a fire-induced progressive collapse. And in fact, we have shown for the first time that fire can induce a progressive collapse.
NIST used detailed data describing the building and its contents to create the most complex computer simulation of a structure collapse ever made. Falling debris from Tower 1 started fires on 10 floors in Building 7. A break in the city water main from the collapse of the towers disabled sprinklers in the lower half of WTC 7, allowing fires on those floors to burn for 7 hours. The NIST computer model was validated with evidence from videos, photos, witness accounts, and other data. It shows that heat from fires expanded long support beams, causing connections and floors to fail.
So you look at the floors failing here, and eventually this column 79 is going to buckle, it fails, and then the entire vertical progression takes place.
The buckled column caused additional collapsed floors and falling debris that removed support from adjacent interior columns. A chain reaction then caused other interior columns to fail in quick succession. The outside shell of the building fell. The NIST team found no evidence that explosives were involved in the collapse.
And our analysis showed that even the smallest explosive charge that was capable of bringing down the critical column in the building, had it occurred, we would have seen sound levels of 120 to 130 decibels about a half a mile away. That would have been an incredibly loud sound, and that sound was not picked up by any of the videos or witnesses that we have talked to.
The team found that World Trade Center 7's design was generally consistent with the relevant building codes when it was built.
Our high-rise buildings in this country are very, very safe. Having a collapse of this nature is a very rare event.
Nevertheless, to ensure that buildings do not collapse in fires, even when sprinklers fail or are not present, the NIST team urges reevaluation of the fire performance of structures with long-span floors and other design elements similar to WTC-7. The team's report also calls for stronger codes, standards, and practices so that other buildings don't suffer the same fate.
So that you can still find that video on YouTube right now. It's from NIST's website, and it's on their YouTube channel. It's from circa 2009. So this next one here that I want to pull up, and let me make sure that it's the right one, is actually the whistleblower from NIST that talks about how
after the
actual reporting itself was so
of the alleged
skewed and so
hijacked
messed up,
international CIA
and how
handouts
they
that rocked
showed
the
that
world.
literally by their own evidence that they literally just lied about what they did. So give me a second here to get this video together.
Play a part. As Ryan began to learn more about the
Tonight's
issues
show is
involved
brought
with
to
the
you by
destruction
what
of the
free time
towers
we can
and the
spare
ongoing
into our
investigation
lives,
into that
because
destruction,
we also
his
have
concerns only
jobs
grew.
and stuff. And
Why had the actual still
Right?
evidence of the tower's
But also
destruction been
with all these
illegally removed
videos
and
and all these
disposed
little
of
documentaries
before
here,
a proper
I want to give a
investigation
big
could
shout
take
out to
place?
Corbett Report.
Why did
And I
not
believe
one
Jason
nor two,
actually had a
but
hand in putting
three
some of these
modern
together
steel frame
too.
buildings
Corbett
completely
Report's
collapsed
been
due to
doing
fire on 9/11,
amazing
given that
content
such
for the
an
better
event
part
had
of a
never taken
decade now,
place
if not
before?
longer. So
Why
I
did
would
the
definitely
towers
say
fail at
if
all
you don't know
when
who
John
he
Skilling,
is, find
the
his
structural engineer
website at
responsible for designing the
corbettreport.com.
towers,
But I
claimed in
think this is the right video, so let me get this shared in here. And if not, we'll just listen to it anyways, because they're all kind of relevant to each other. So let me.
1993, just 5 years before his death, that his own analysis of jet plane crashes and
hold
ensuing
on.
fires in the towers had concluded that the building structure would still be there. And why had Knobloch himself bragged about UL's role in testing the Trade Center? Was the site manager at Environmental Health
I wish this was way easier. Here we go.
Laboratories, EHL, in South Bend, Indiana. At the time, EHL was a subsidiary of Underwriters Laboratories, UL, a global safety consulting and certification corporation that tests a range of consumer and industrial products for compliance with government safety standards. Among many other things, UL provides fire resistance ratings for structural steel components to ensure compliance with New York City building codes. Just weeks after the events of September 11, 2001, UL's then CEO, Loring Knobloch, visited Ryan's EHL lab in South Bend. During his speech there, Knobloch assured the lab's workers that UL had certified the steel in the World Trade Center buildings and that we should all be proud that the buildings had stood for so long under such intense conditions. Knowing UL's role in producing a fire resistance directory and providing ratings for steel components, Ryan thought little of the statement at the time. But Ryan's curiosity about UL's role in the certification of the World Trade Center steel was piqued when, in 2003, he began to question the lies that the Bush administration had used to justify the invasion of Iraq and, eventually, to question the official story of September 11th itself. Recalling Knobloch's comments about UL's role in certifying the Trade Center steel shortly after 9/11, Ryan began to take a professional interest in the official investigation into the Twin Towers' destruction, an investigation in which UL itself was to play a part. As Ryan began to learn more about the issues involved with the destruction of the towers and the ongoing investigation into that destruction, his concerns only grew. Why had the actual steel evidence of the tower's destruction been illegally removed and disposed of before a proper investigation could take place? Why did not one or two, but 3 modern steel frame buildings completely collapse due to fire on 9/11, given that such an event had never taken place before? Why did the towers fail at all when John Skilling, the structural engineer responsible for designing the towers, claimed in 1993, just 5 years before his death, that his own analysis of jet plane crashes and ensuing fires in the towers had concluded that the building's structure would still be there? And why had Knobloch himself bragged about UL's role in testing the Trade Center steel, a test that would have rated the floor components for 2 hours of fire resistance and the building columns for 3 hours, when the North Tower failed in 102 minutes, and the South Tower came down in just 56 minutes? These concerns
So it's those numbers there that are the important ones. And I know that everyone kind of knows about this and that it's something that isn't really brought up or talked about much anymore. But the fact that there's been no justice done about it. And it brought up right there when it talked about how it was the buildings themselves, that steel was rated for 2 hours at a heat higher than what those were for a longer period of time. And the fact that that can come out and that information can exist to the point that currently there's an active investigation going on that said, no, it wasn't fire. That literally has discredited the company that is tasked with rating fire resistance. So it just shows how everything can be politicized. Everything works to justify its own existence in the system that just allows these war criminals to continue. But let me get that article pulled up here so I can show that to you real quick. And this is from foreignpolicyjournal.com. So there was a group in Alaska here, and I have it pulled up on the front of my screen so the other hosts can't see it right now. But there was basically a bunch of doctors from from Alaska's University Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And essentially their conclusion was that our study is the fire did not cause the collapse of World Trade Center 7 on 9/11, contrary to the conclusions of NIST and private engineering firms that studied the collapse. The secondary conclusion of our study is the collapse of World Trade Center 7 is a global failure involving near simultaneous failure of every column in the building. So they don't have an answer to how or why it failed. They just know the fact that all of these official stories that were being fed are bullshit, and they're investigating it further. And that was something that we had talked with Jason about a little bit too. So I wanted to make sure I got that article out and in front of everybody so they could see that. But I'm going to move on here to the next whistleblower, and I'll kind of speed it up. I won't make us go through every single one of these. But this next one here, let me pause it real fast, is
before you get the next clip up, I wanted to pose a question to our panel, and then if anybody in the chat wants to answer. So we've talked about how old we were when 9/11 happened. I want to know how old or what year do you remember when you stopped believing the official narrative? When did you start questioning?
Ooh, I remember it was September 11th, 2001. That is I was that days old when I started questioning the official narrative that was coming out of there. 100%.
Yeah.
See,
So for me, my answer is really short. It's not as interesting. So for me, I was really young when this happened. I like don't even, yeah, I mean, I was really young. So a lot was like shielded from us. And yeah, so I was like maybe 7 or 8 years old when this had happened. And I remember watching a documentary in high school. It was my freshman year of high school. So that was maybe 09. And I remember one of our teachers, it was, yeah, I'm young, but one of our teachers, and I'm surprised that he did this and happy that he did, he showed us a documentary about 9/11 and it potentially, and at that time I kind of saw it as like a conspiracy theory, but I remember I watched this and I thought, oh my gosh, all this evidence is really up. I said, this is almost too compelling to me. And then it was at that point that I started to realize that perhaps everything that I had really thought up to that point about it was probably not true because it was just so compelling. So around like 14.
so for me, I was in the 5th grade when it happened. I don't want to go into like the detail, like all the shit that I remember about the day itself, but in 2008, 2009, I was in an early college program, and one of the guys there was an organizer for Barack Obama's campaign. And he was actually showing people the loose change video for that whole week leading up to September 11th. He had booked the date. So that was one of the big like shockers to me, was seeing that video. But in retrospect, the guy being a Obama campaign organizer, his thing was like, Obama's going to get the war criminals, like he's going to get Bush and Cheney. So in retrospect, he was wrong, but overall, I really appreciate him showing me the loose change video. What about you, Christy?
So I was a senior in high school when it happened, and I would say probably it was a couple years into college when I started seeing some of these documentaries on YouTube and talking to more people, and really started hearing about the evidence that you guys had talked about, and that we're, now even more stuff has come out since then. So yeah, I think it's interesting to me, and when people kind of get enlightened to it, and then also people that still are very much firm in that narrative story. So I think that's just an interesting question. And yeah, if anybody in the chat wants to answer too about how old you were when it happened, and then yeah, if you had a different date of time when you decided, I don't believe that.
So Rob Juno in the chat said day one, Christy. And then Schultzy100 said, let me think about it. And John Lehane says, as it happened, I was asleep. My flatmate woke me up telling me the tower had just collapsed after a jet hit it. I said it was not true, and he watched a film or impossible and went back to sleep. I guess that's not too much of an answer, but Rob agrees that on day one. So I think, and of course I do think that like how old you were and where you're at in your life, you're gonna, feel differently about it. So like Steve, you were saying, like day one, I mean, you saw right through this, and it's very interesting, and it's just so frightening that I remember when I first like started to realize, that what we were being told wasn't, it was scary to realize that our government was run by, I think at that moment I realized our government was run by people who really were psychopathic, vicious people.
I think WikiLeaks too was a big eye-opening piece to this too, to understand why things like this could be used to go to war, and how it can be used to almost seduce the public into war. And yeah, what we were really doing in the Middle East. And so yeah, I think all of this is related for now, what we're fighting for Julian. All these little nuggets of information that we received since 9/11 have really opened our eyes and opened everybody else's eyes.
And it's interesting to see how they propagandize this day, like not just with the like hashtag never forget bullshit, but with the people that are supposed to be the ones speaking the truth. And like So my dad's an always Trumper. Like, he thinks that Trump's taken. But I was just standing over his shoulder as he was scrolling through Facebook, and his feed is all Islamophobia. Like, it's literally like talking about how they'll talk about how the planes hit the towers, but they'll never talk about how it was the Muslims that were flying them, and just shit like that. And like, that's the part that about the whole narrative of Trump's taking on the deep state and Trump's gonna kind of take our country back from these terrible, horrible people, is look at the literal spat that he had with Ilhan Omar. Like, love or hate or whatever. She had said some words about 9/11 that weren't even fucking offensive. And it was some people did some things. And to me, I hear that and I'm like, yeah, some people that are rogue elements of the United States Intelligence Agency did some things by orchestrating planes smashing into towers, a missile hitting the Pentagon, and then manufactured another site in Pennsylvania. But instead of using that moment to fight the deep state and speak truth to power, President Trump just decides to make it a literal just Islamophobia jerk off where all they're doing is talking shit about this girl because the civil rights of Muslims are being infringed upon in our country. So even the opportunities, like for all of the Trump supporters out there, all of the opportunities he has to be honest about 9/11, which is a core fundamental thing that we have to have the truth about before anything can start progressing forward. He's not even bringing anything forward about that. Whenever the conversation's brought up, he hyperflexes with the Muslims and then moves on. There's never any talk about how it was orchestrated by our intelligence community. So that's one of the things that really frustrates me.
What bothers me too is I just saw something that was unrelated in the chat. That's why I started to laugh. But what I was going to say was that what bothers me is that what has come as a result of this, which is the national security state that we live in. If you go on an airplane, I mean, you're literally being searched. If you go to a game, if you go to anything, I mean, there's just mass surveillance that really bothers me. And Andrew, I know you said like you don't even want to go on a plane because of that, and it's a really uncomfortable experience, and they've done that to us through this. And I think that was a huge reason for an intended outcome. And you've spoken to me about that before. And I thought that was a really interesting point. If you want to elaborate, you have a term for it. I don't want to botch it, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
No, go ahead.
Problem solution.
Oh, the problem reaction solution.
Problem reaction solution.
I knew I was going to get it wrong.
Yeah, no, that's fundamentally what we witnessed. It was mapped out in by the Project for a New American Century, which included wonderful people like Michael Chertoff and John Bolton, Paul Wolfowitz, and it's John Bolton doesn't leave or go away. He was part of orchestrating the erosion of civil liberties in this country. He will leave his national security advisor spot and go back to his political action committee. Because if you didn't know, John Bolton has a PAC. And a week before he became national security advisor, he stepped down from his position on the board of Diamond Energy. Diamond Energy is the oil extraction corporation that used to be the Harbinger Group, which used to be Zapata Oil, which was George W. Bush's venture. At any rate, we what 9/11 did was fundamentally erode basically all of our civil liberties. There's now you can go away and disappear if you are held under the umbrella of terrorism, and this applies to U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens, even children, were on Barack Obama's kill list. The president of the United States authorized a drone strike on a 16-year-old kid.
The Nobel Prize winning
The
president.
Nobel
of the United
Peace
States.
Prize winning
Peace
president.
prize.
Peace
Yes.
Prize.
Peace prize.
Ordered a drone strike on a 16-year-old kid in the name of this war on terror.
So I
This
want to hop back over to the videos real quick before we get too far away from it. But so I'm going to get this next one going. This is about the commissioners that were actually doing the whistleblowing on the 9/11 report and everything. So let me get this started here.
Of all the 9/11 whistleblowers, perhaps the most noteworthy are the 9/11 commissioners themselves. The 9/11 Commission, formerly the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, was set up by President George W. Bush, who dragged his heels a full 441 days before finally establishing a body to investigate the events of September 11, 2001, and to prepare a full and complete account of the circumstances surrounding them. But that remarkable gap between the events and the impaneling of the commission was not due to mere laziness. Bush actively resisted any investigation for as long as he could, taking the extraordinary and unprecedented step of personally asking Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle to limit Congress's investigation into those events. It was only when the political pressure to form a commission of inquiry became too great for Bush to resist that he authorized the commission and nominated a chairman, Henry Kissinger.
Today I'm pleased to announce my choice for commission chairman, Dr. Henry Kissinger.
Do you have any concerns about, once the commission begins its work, if fingers point to valuable allies, say Saudi Arabia, for example, the implications, the policy implications this could have to the United States, particularly at this delicate time?
I have been given every assurance by the president that we should go where the facts lead us.
Kissinger's reputation as a cover-up artist and tool of the political establishment was such that even the New York Times speculated that Bush's nomination of him showed that the president wanted to contain the investigation into 9/11, not enable it. 9/11 victims' family members, similarly concerned that Kissinger was being appointed to run a cover-up commission, challenged him to his face to release the client list of his political consulting business.
Several family members approached Kissinger and requested a meeting at his office in New York. Prior to the meeting, Kristen Breitweiser conducted a thorough investigation of Kissinger's potential conflicts of interest.
Probably much to the chagrin of some of the people in the room, Lori asked some very pointed questions. Would you have any Saudi American clients that you would like to tell us about? And he was very uncomfortable, kind of twisting and turning on the couch. And then she asked whether he had any clients by the name of bin Laden. And he just about fell off his couch.
Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger stepped down from the position Friday.
Suggestions of political cover-up did not end there, nor were they confined to a marginalized, lunatic fringe of conspiracy theorists derided by the establishment media. The remarkable and almost completely unreported fact is that 6 out of the 10 commissioners, Kane and Hamilton, as well as Bob Kerrey, Tim Romer, John Lehman, and Max Cleland, have all expressed concern that the commission was misled, stymied, hampered by conflicts of interest, and, ultimately, forced to participate in a politically motivated cover-up. Kane and Hamilton famously remarked that the commission had been set up to fail.
Even Lee Hamilton, the co-chair of the 9/11 Commission itself, admits to us that the process he headed up was seriously flawed.
So there are all kinds of reasons. We thought we were set up to fail. We got started late. We had a very short time frame. Indeed, we had to get it extended. We did not have enough money. They were afraid we were going to hang somebody.
But it was very difficult, and Lee and I write in our book that we think the commission in many ways was set up to fail.
As it turns out, the majority of the commissioners felt that the commission had been lied to, deliberately obstructed, undermined by the White House, or set up with staff that had conflicts of interest in the investigation. One of these concerned commissioners, Max Cleland, resigned because the commission had been deliberately compromised by the President of the United States. Commissioner John Lehman, meanwhile, admitted on NBC Nightly News that the commission had to go through Karl Rove and other senior White House members to access key documents in their investigation, and that we purposely put together a staff that had, in a way, conflicts of interest, stressing, lest there be any doubt, that all of the staff had, to a certain extent, some conflict of interest. Commission members even considered bringing criminal charges against Pentagon officials who had deliberately lied to them about the military's complete lack of response on that day. But perhaps the most cryptic of all the dissenting commissioners was Bob Kerrey. In 2009, he remarked that 9/11 was a 30-year-old conspiracy, but no mainstream reporter has ever followed up with him to clarify this statement.
Do you support a criminal investigation into 9/11? Because I know yours was an exposition. It was not a criminal investigation.
I don't think so, but I don't know. I mean, I do support a permanent commission to examine not just that, but lots of other things in this area. So.
But if it's a permanent cover-up, then it's. I mean, if it's an act of war and it's hiding things, which everyone on your commission knew that the Pentagon was changing their stories, lying to you, right. And it's a cover-up of an act of war, and under Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution, it's treason. So unless we get to the very bottom of it, then we're still talking a treasonous exposition.
This is a longer conversation. I'm not sure you ever get to the bottom of it.
We have to, or we can't save our countries.
I don't think. Well, if that's the condition upon which we're going to be saving our country, because the problem is it's a 30-year-old conspiracy.
No, I'm talking about 9/11.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, you are. You mean this?
Yeah. Anyway, I got it.
Okay, be well.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
It is utterly wrong.
So I'll cut it there. I just wanted to play those and get those out for people. I thought it was a really, really important thing to listen and watch through because it just reinforces the fact that we're fucking right. So CorbettReport.com/9/11 whistleblowers, or on YouTube, the Corbett Report. It's fucking awesome. But yeah, no, we can pick up with whatever else unless someone has something they want to add on to that or talk about.
Well, I did want to mention the New York fire chiefs from Franklin Square and Munson outside of Queen who have petitioned a grand jury to reopen an investigation into the collapse of World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, and 7, and they have in their amended complaint 57 separate exhibits of evidence and testimony and research and data, and then they have a list of charges that they would like to bring against the United States government. And the thing about it is that more fire chiefs are going to sign on to this. This is going to be, you can't, it's really, really hard to discredit the people who were digging through the rubble trying to pull out their fellow first responders and any victims that they could find. Like, those people are, some of them are in very poor health from respiratory illnesses they sustained from working that. Like, Jon Stewart can't come to everybody's rescue all the time, but he does go to bat for the New York Fire Department quite a bit. I don't think that, I'm not trying to say that he would sign on to this, but I'm trying to say that more fire chiefs will, as awareness about this is spread. I really think that almost 20 years removed from it, people are starting to become a little bit more comfortable with questioning the official narrative. And I think that if there was ever a time to back your fire department, now would be a great time to do that. And this would be a great way to show your support.
And one thing too is fire departments are literally the only part of a government that doesn't get shit most of the time, unless they're doing some like shady shit with overtime and stuff like that. So when fire departments actually start standing up and speaking out, the community takes that as a serious, almost like not threat, but as a serious concern. So I think that that's really cool to start seeing. But I can't support any presidential candidate that won't just speak the truth about it, or at least be willing to question the official truth about it. Because what this is going to be is Hitler burning the Reichstag. Like, this will be the event that allowed fascism to rise within the United States. And it is. Like, it's the thing that stripped our rights away. But that's why it's so important right now to unite with other groups to almost have that anti-Patriot Act message, to where ICE groups are fighting against the invasion from anti-ICE groups are fighting against the invasion of ICE agents, and that comes back to the Patriot Act and how those groups are allowed to exist by order of that. Women's rights groups and the Fourth Amendment and the right to privacy, as it's related to like abortion and birth control and things like that. Those groups are all having their rights violated by the Patriot Act. And so I think trying us as essentially like the free speech community, almost reaching out to them to try to stand in solidarity with them, and go to their protests and go to their actions to participate in something that at the end of the day we could strike the heart of the beast, at least for this current era, which is the Patriot Act. And that's something that's so important to strip away, because it's what allows the wars to continue.
You're absolutely right. What sucks about the article that I brought up earlier about the complete compromising of the Guardian is that you can't not draw parallels to US media about that. The outlet Think Progress, which was the Center for American Progress, which was ran by Neera Tanden. It was their media arm. They just folded because their funding got yanked. They said they couldn't keep the lights on. We found out through the Podesta emails that Neera Tanden herself referred to the staff writers at Think Progress as radical leftists. What I really think went on here is that a unionized staff of like 11 or 12 people completely got the axe. Center for American Progress retained all the rights to all of the websites and the Twitter accounts and whatnot, and they can now outsource and use this this outlet that people who might not be paying close attention will still think, oh, this is Think Progress. They're a left-leaning outlet. They kind of call it like they see it. They're decent, and it will be 100% Neera Tanden, Center for American Progress, heavily influenced by intelligence agencies' content.
And speaking of intelligence agencies' content, do you want to talk about your spat you have going on with the New York Times right now, Taylor?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about what happened with the New York Times. So basically, and again, I am not making any assumptions about anything, because I really don't know if they plagiarized or not. But basically, I wrote an article that circulated not too great, but pretty well throughout independent media. It was the only article that was basically a collection of all of the 2020 presidential candidate statements on Julian Assange, on a free press, also Chelsea Manning. I just, did a lot of research, and I looked for reputable sources where they kind of, spoke about Assange and, addressed their feelings about him and how they would handle him if they were to become president, and also just their perspectives on WikiLeaks and that type of journalism in general. So I was the only one to have this article out. I published it, the first version, back in June 28th, actually. And that's significant because that was the second day of the first round of the Democratic primary presidential debates. So that was the first version. And then that was Andrew's birthday also. And I then, kind of touched up the article, and I created a new version of it August 28th. So just very recently, I kind of re-edited that and added more to it. And I continue to do that as we learn more about the candidates, as more people enter the race and as people exit the race. I always try to keep it updated. Well, the other day, basically, I was just looking on Twitter, and I was tagged in a post. And this post was an article about the presidential candidates and their perspectives on Julian Assange and the espionage charges in particular. And at first I thought it was my article, but it wasn't. It was one that was written by the New York Times. However, it was remarkably similar to mine in that the structure and format was the same. It's not word for word the same, but it's basically the same idea. So it was just seeing that was shocking to me, because I would not expect them to, number one, even cover this issue. I'm glad that they did. I want the mainstream media to be talking about this. They did a bad job, however, and I addressed that in a video that I posted earlier today. I encourage you to watch it, not right now, but later. Not now, but I addressed all of my concerns about their article. And basically I was not happy at first. I felt like my original idea was, perhaps stolen. It could have not been. I mean, they could have really just, come up with this idea on their own and just not research what was already out there at first. But if you did type in your search engine, Assange in the 2020 presidential candidates, my article is the first thing to pop up. I still believe that it is, to this day, the first thing that will show up. Now, of course, we're, a small organization. ActionForAssange is where the article is posted. Not many people are seeing it. It's very small, but they could have seen that and just realized that I wouldn't make a fuss about it and that nobody would pay attention. So they just kind of took the idea. And I am absolutely just speculating at this point. However, I should call them. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, can I jump in, because I covered your article through ActionForAssange, the updated one that included the Green Party candidates and whatnot, and Adam Kokesh, and when this happened, I went and I looked at that New York Times article, and you're right. Like I described it as if somebody was trying to cook like a reduction sauce, but did a terrible job, and then served it anyway. The
weirdest part to me about all this too.
One of the quotes that he uses for a presidential candidate is just the word "no." That's it. Like,
exactly,
it's
not
even
thorough. And I made the point, it's not thorough at all. And I make the point in the video too, that they don't even include all the candidates. They're so lazy that they pre-select which ones they think are more important than the others. So they're basically deciding for everybody who they think they should, care about, or who they should potentially think about voting for. For me, I covered everybody because I felt that was the fair and appropriate thing to do. They did not do that. And I don't want to get too much into it because I could be here forever talking about it, but I was just very unhappy to see that. If they would have done a good job, and if they would have done a very thorough report and really asked these candidates like hard pressing questions, and have done a good report on this, and did their journalistic duty to hold these people accountable for previous statements they've made and their current stance on Assange and the espionage charges, I would be very happy with that article, because again, I do think it should be out there and people should be exposed to it on a much, much wider scale, because my article isn't going to get there. But they didn't do that. They failed to do that. And Andrew, I know you wanted to make a point about
well, I was going to say,
weird to you. Go ahead.
The two things with this, above and beyond anything, is one of them, it's getting ahead of a story. It's getting an article written on the back end of a news website, of a legitimate news website, that will allow other websites to source that information to get specifically how those candidates want those words crafted when they are released. So that's kind of just point one, is that's like a behind the scenes propaganda thing, because I don't think CNN even put it like super accessible on their website. But the other part, and this kind of goes back to the whole, we live in a surveillance state, at least in my opinion. About a week ago, we had started circulating this article through different independent media sources to try to get them to run it, to try to have them use this as some kind of source to build their own or what have you. And we reached out to a few different ones that aren't mainstream media sources, and then this pops up. So to me, that's kind of, hey, like, you're being watched. Like, they're looking at the actions that you're taking. They're seeing what information you're trying to get out and spinning it and putting it out their own way to try to get ahead of some type of story, or when it becomes a larger story, already have this information out to push these other content pieces down.
That's a good point. And also, let's remember our website started to have this weird malfunction about
Oh,
the
yeah.
show. Remember, guys? And we were like, what is this? We were so confused, and we were contacting the original person who gave us this website saying who I believe is, would know how to fix this issue. And that individual was even confused as to exactly what really was going on. But yeah, the timing and all of it's very weird. I did call the New York Times, and Steve thinks it's very funny because in the video, I say that I left a calm message. I did. And I did leave a very calm message, and I told them to call me back. Of course, they did not call me back. But I'm going to keep pressing them on this because he knows
I'm sorry, dude. I am. It's just
so mad. Andrew was the first person I called, and I was furious. And then Steve heard everything that I had to say earlier today, because I was not happy. So they know that this was something that really sparked a lot of emotions in me. And it may sound like I'm overreacting, but I put so much hard work into this. Like, I put hours upon hours of work in this, and this was something that it was like one of my passion pieces. And to just have the New York Times do a half-assed job, and then this get seen as.
Well, here's the thing. When you publish through small outlets, when you put your content out through a source that is 100% disconnected from the six media company apparatus, you have very little recourse for when your work gets ripped off, because everyone has the same access to see it. Any journalist who's even a hack will be like, okay, let me see how many other people have written this story and what, let me see what the ones who have gotten the most attention, how they framed it, because maybe I'll rip that off because I'm a hack, or maybe I'm actually trying to do my job and I'm going to present this story and frame it in the way that I think it should be framed and not what's getting the most clicks. And you're gonna see your article, as you said, when that search comes up. So unless that's what it's hard to fight back against that, because it's the New York Times. They have this the statement that oh, we had this questionnaire come out way back in. The questionnaire is vague. You're muted.
Exactly. Yeah. Here, they say that they had this questionnaire out in June. They started asking the candidates about these espionage charges, but they waited till September 10th to publish the damn article. That doesn't even make any sense. Like, why would you wait so long? Like, why would you wait? You're the New York Times. You have access to all these
Right.
people.
Well, yeah, and when it was, I mean, we've had a few people drop out. It's slightly marginally less of a clown car shit show, but not really. And at the time when they passed out the questionnaire and when they got the information back, that would have been a perfect time to do it, because if they passed the questionnaire, what'd they say, in April is when they sent it out or something like that?
They said they sent it out in June, which is when the
Or in
first
June,
version
yeah.
was
So
published.
Assange had already been arrested at that point. Every presidential candidate should have at least had a position on it, and that would have been something that people needed to know when they got the information, not a month or 2 months after your article came out with much more detailed information and necessary corrections. And it seems at best unlikely that writer would not have seen it, and it seems like lazy journalism by a very large outlet that could always say, oh, I never saw that, I just had this thing that I had to write, and it's a thing that we should be talking about.
Exactly. And when I actually, and also for everybody that's watching, retweet this out. I hate to do that, but tweet this out, make some noise about it, because if they're going to do this they've done it before to people, but if they're going to do this to me, I've said, I am nobody from Ohio. That's who I am. I'm no one from Ohio. Like, if they're going to, this is going to continually happen, and they're going to try to take over independent media and people that are just starting to, you know, get into the journalism, independent journalism industry, and, you know, try to take that over. That's what we have now, and we can't allow them to take that from us. So, you know,
They already
tweet about
succeeded
it.
with
And
PYT. Like
yeah,
they're
that's
already
a good
super
point.
successful at
But
that.
I do
Like,
want to.
And I agree. Even if this person had no idea about your article, they still did a half-assed job. Like you said, they didn't include all the candidates. Tulsi Gabbard had, like you said in your video, 2 lines, if that, and she's the most outspoken of all the candidates on Julian Assange, and you know, and what the case means to her as a presidential candidate, and what she would do as president. So it's a very cheap knockoff of your well-researched article, and I think that's in itself worth making noise about. Regardless, like you said, it's hard to prove whether this person knew about your article or not. I think ethically, it's not an ideal situation for them to be copying and not researching to see if somebody has done this article. So
yeah, exactly. I really appreciate the support from everybody too. I'm really grateful for that. Also too, some people were telling me today, and everybody has a right to their opinion. Some people said, you know, Taylor, we actually really do disagree with you, and we do not feel that it was plagiarism. It could very well not be. I mean, they could have not known. However, plagiarism is copying an original idea. I did contact an attorney who is a media law attorney, an expert in this. This is what he has practiced. And I sent him both articles. I told him the situation, and he got back to me, and he said it's not a violation of any copyright. There's no copyright infringement because it's not word for word. But he said there is a legitimate question of, is this plagiarism? He said, however, they could easily argue that because this is such a hot topic issue right now, they could have easily said this is something that is so something that everybody like knows about, that they could have, that both of you could have thought about this idea before actually or both of us could have thought of this idea and have just, they could have done it even though I did it before and they have never seen my article. They could make that argument. But this attorney did say to me that yes, there are questions, legitimate questions that could be raised, that this is in fact plagiarism. So I just want to make that clear for those who were saying that it wasn't plagiarism. I went to an expert in this and they said that yes, it is, but they would have to, of course, prove that, and that is not something that's very easy at all. So, yeah, I just appreciate the support from everybody, and yeah, I wish that the New York Times would have done that article justice. It's an important piece that needs to get out to the masses and for people to see this on a greater scale. And unfortunately, well, fortunately, number one, they will be able to see it. However, they are not going to see a version that is thorough and that includes everything that they need to know. They have a much watered down version
Well,
of my article.
That's the dangerous part. That's what they did is remove all of the factual information that you had in your article, and they just left it at what this candidate said with zero framing around it and no substance to it whatsoever. And it's not lazy, it's disingenuous, it's deceptive, and it's part of an ongoing effort to manufacture confusion around Julian Assange, to guarantee that the image that people have of him is purely negative, whether it's about his personality or his hygiene or who he may have or may not have hung out with, or but all of that. So it's more nefarious when it's presented as empty as that was in the New York Times. And you're right though, people are going to see that, and that's going to help shape their picture in their mind when someone brings up Julian Assange. And people should have the exact same ability to see your work, but by the nature of censorship algorithms, it's probably going to happen a little bit less likely.
Yeah, it absolutely will happen less likely again. Like nobody, I'm nothing compared to the New York Times. So I think it was also maybe a way, say if they did see this article, it was maybe a way to kind of like have their version be the one that's noticed, the much watered down version, because they clearly have an agenda. And like Christy was saying too, I made mention in the video that Tulsi Gabbard, who's been the most outspoken advocate for Julian Assange, had 2 sentences because they don't want people to hear what she had to say about Assange. They don't want people to know that, so they put this very brief 2 sentences underneath her name. Yet Joe Biden, everybody who had a negative thing to say, had a much longer section.
And they didn't reference independent media at all. Like for the Marianne Williams thing, they didn't bring up anything about her
Jimmy
being
Dore.
on Jimmy Dore's show and being
No, they
questioned
didn't.
by him.
Exactly. No, they would never do that. But Jimmy Dore was the first one. I could say that with almost absolute certainty, that he was the first person to question her about Julian Assange, and he did a fantastic job with that. And I sourced that in my article, and I put the original link to the source so everybody could watch the interview, because he does a great job, and you really do get a feel for how she feels about Julian Assange and whistleblowers in general. So I see that, Steve, I know you have a question for us in the chat, so I'll hand it over to you now. But thank you to everybody for supporting me.
Because this relates directly to what you were just talking about. Because Tulsi Gabbard has these views, because she's had the most to say, because the New York Times limited her comments on Julian Assange to 2 sentences, and because she got cheated out of tomorrow's debate, do you think that will be the night that they ask a Julian Assange question on the Democratic debate stage?
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that. If they do, that will be, first of all, I hope that they do. I want them to, because, and that's why I wrote this article to begin with, because I knew they weren't going to address it, and I wanted them to. I hope that they do. If they do, that would point to such complicity between the mainstream media and
because nobody else is going to say anything nice about him.
No.
Nobody else.
Yep, not even Sanders. Sanders will say,
No.
"Oh, something, free speech."
I don't know if they want to give Julian Assange that much publicity, but I think I don't know. I think they're dumb enough to do it. I think they're dumb enough to do it and make it so obvious that they took Tulsi off the stage and then asked the question.
God, I hope so. And just for the record, we've tried to get Tulsi on this show for almost a month. So just to put that out there, I was trying to get her on this stream tonight to actually just talk the truth about 9/11. So just that way, that's on record. What were you saying, Steve?
Oh no, I was just wondering if the chat had an answer yet, but I don't see one. I just thought of that question too, Taylor. As you guys were talking about this, I was like, son of a bitch. If they were going to do it, what better time than at the debate that they screwed her out of? Because yeah, you're absolutely right, Andrew. Bernie Sanders is not going to go to bat for Julian Assange. He will maybe grumble something about the Trump administration doesn't get to say what is and isn't free speech, journalism, like something like that, but that'll be the extent of it, and there will be nothing of substance at all about the person Julian Assange, who is being slowly tortured to death in Belmarsh prison while we're doing this vigil.
Also, too, I'm so glad you brought that up, Steve. We are going to be on high alert for this, because that is such a brilliant point. I'm glad you brought that up. I know you said you just thought of that on a whim as we were talking about Tulsi, but also we'll be live tweet, Andrew, I guess we've done it before. We'll live tweet on ActionForAssange Twitter account during these debates, because we'll of course be, paying attention, and we always like to provide our thoughts and our commentary, and we'll be retweeting out all the co-hosts from our personal accounts, and Slow News Day Show account, Christy, your account too, because they should address this. And I make the point in my article that how a candidate perceives the ultimate check on power is very indicative of how that person will behave when they are in power. Anything else that you guys want to address this evening? Any news updates, things going on with you all with your own activism and anything else?
So I was going to bring this up off camera, but I am putting together an article to publish through ActionForAssange that's called, like, specifically a call to action to get the Write a Press Club thing going. I think that's something that really needs to happen, because I think until people start holding their own local media and their own, in-state media account, force them to make a statement, force them to confront what's being done to Julian Assange, you won't even see an editorial that gets slipped through. So I think some pressure should be put on journalists at the local level to take a stand for this. And I would encourage everybody to do that. What do I have coming on? Let's see. Nico House will be on my show on Sunday. That I was actually going to ask Andrew if he wanted to maybe be the technical director for that, if you have time. But you can always find my show on YouTube at youtube.com/Slow News Day Podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Slow News Day Show. I am on Patreon at patreon.com/Slow News Day. I am putting more content up there. You can live stream from Patreon now, which is something that I gotta check out. If you're unfamiliar with my work, I interview all kinds of great people who operate outside of the narrative. I've had on John Kiriakou and Whitney Webb and Elizabeth Voss. The last interview I did with Elizabeth Voss, by the way, is fantastic, and you should watch that. But other than that, yeah, I don't know. Thanks everyone for being a part of this thing, and thanks to Jason Bermas as well. He was fantastic the first half hour, 45 minutes of the show, however long he was on.
Yeah, so just a quick update with my court case. I'll most likely be filing a continuance to be able to better prepare for my case, but I do have an attorney now that's representing me. I met with him yesterday, and I don't want to get too much in the details about it, but the long story short is I have good support all the way through the process of, even if I have to appeal this to either the Ninth Circuit District Supreme Court or the Ohio Supreme Court to actually get the case reviewed in the event that it is thrown out or not thrown out, but that I am found guilty based on the trial court. So that's something that's really, really cool that I have that back end support built in there with it too. So I want to give a big shout out to him. I don't want to use his name because he's involved in a lot of things here locally. But yeah, I really appreciate the gentleman that's helping me out. He's been an activist for the better part of 40 years now. I don't remember the name of the riots, but he was one of the people in the turtle suits in the front of the Portland riots a long time ago. So awesome guy, man of upstanding character. So I'm super excited to be working and collaborating with him.
I just want to give a shout out to everybody who sent me a lot of messages and love. If you follow me on Twitter, I haven't been as active. My brother-in-law passed away about a week ago, and I just wanted to kind of give a shout out to him because he had a PhD in philosophy, and he was somebody who was always searching for the truth and was very open to hearing conversations. And I think ultimately that's what we're doing here is we're fighting for the truth. We're fighting for the ability to speak the truth. So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks to everybody for being patient with me. I really hope to be back up to my normal social media and of course being on this show. in the next week or so, as my family kind of goes through the process that you do when you lose a loved one. So yeah, hug your loved ones, tell everybody how much they mean to you in your life, and just appreciate every day, because there's many people out there searching and fighting for the truth, and sometimes they leave us before you think they're going to. Otherwise, you can find me at Christy MKDA4, and you can follow also at Unity4J on Twitter as well.
Yeah, Christy, yeah, very sorry to hear about your brother-in-law, but you've been so tough throughout this, and still, so dedicated to this cause, and, still working really hard alongside with us. And we're sending all of our love and support to you and to your family at this time. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and for watching these vigils. Make sure that you do like and subscribe, and retweet or tweet at us also. And you guys are really great, and we are just so happy to be talking with you guys, and getting to know you. We want to probably do more of that, where you guys let us know in the chat like some of your thoughts on things, and we ask you guys questions as you ask us questions. So thank you so much for tuning in, and you can find me on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak, and you can follow ActionForAssange at @action_4 Assange. And also, please check out my video with the New York Times. Please try to make some noise at them. Thank you all so much for supporting me and for supporting these vigils, and we'll keep you updated with everything that we have, coming up later. And next month there's a lot of events going on, so we'll keep everybody updated. And we have a lot of fighting to do in a short amount of time, but we could all do this together, and we will all see you next week.